Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, from San Diego, California. My name is Jim Kidrick. I'm the president and CEO of the San Diego Air and Space Museum. And on behalf of our board of directors, our staff, our many volunteers here in San Diego, welcome today to Apollo 13, our finest hour, America's finest hour. We have some very special guests with us today, and we're going to kind of get to it right away. We're going to be with you the next 2 hours, and we look forward to a very productive, learning and enjoyable session with some real heroes. So I'm going to start out right away with some intros, let them intro themselves, of course, and we'll start out with Jim Lovell, our mission commander.
Here I am, waiting to take care of everything and talk to the rest of my people. And it's nice to be on board to see you.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, Fred Hayes.
I'm here, ready to go.
Okay, Milt Windler, our lead flight director for Apollo 13.
Hi, I'm Milt Windler, and I'm here also. I'm glad to be still alive at 50.
50? Well, you're not looking good for 50, if that makes any sense. And Jerry Griffin.
Yeah, gold flight here. I'm present and accounted for, I think, and ready to go.
Wonderful. Okay, Glenn Lunny.
I'm here too. Nice to be with all of you.
And Gene Krantz.
And Jim, I'd like to thank you for putting on this event today. You know, everybody is basically constrained in their ability to get around, and I think we had the opportunity to do a lot of reunions, get together that were all canceled out, and you have brought us back together, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Gene. Thanks for saying so. It's a real treat for all of us. Okay, and then Mark Larson, chairman of our board at the Air and Space Museum.
Hey, Jim, I want to thank you as the president and CEO, and Sandy, our CFO, and the entire team, our board of directors. This is another example of how special this museum is, even in these times of the COVID-19 virus crisis. The fact that all these things, and we'll talk about this in a bit, about how the so-called curse of Apollo 13 even extends to the 50th anniversary. All these events that were planned, including ours in recent days, scrubbed for this month. But the fact that you and the team were able to put this together with this great assemblage of the people who made the history is phenomenal. And I want to thank you for that very much.
Well, all of the people with us today have taught me some great lessons over time. We're never scrubbed, okay? Yeah. You know, as we would say in the old days, we launch at dawn and we roll in out of the sun. So, so we're going to get to it. We're going to start right away with Milt, our lead flight director. We wanted to start out with the basics. What were the primary Apollo 13 goals at the beginning of the mission? And were there any concerns with Jack, of course, being replaced by Ken Mattingly so short a time prior to the launch?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I don't agree with Mark about Apollo. There's such a thing as a curse of Apollo 13. I never felt like it was cursed at all, but of course, the goal was to have another scientific expedition to the moon. We were going to fly up and land at Fra Mauro and have several EVAs and come back with a lot of rocks and geology information, which we didn't quite get. But we probably got something at least as important, probably more important, I would think, from the crew's point of view, is we brought the crew back safely. So I don't think really going into it, anybody was real concerned about Mattingly and his measles problem. Most of us are used to not thinking too much about what doctors think anyway, and we didn't really believe that was a threat, but people decided that they needed to replace him, and we had another crew member who was unfortunately not able to be with us right now, but he's passed on. But we felt like that everybody was well trained, and nobody's indispensable, and they can take any of us out, replace us with somebody else that'll do just as good a job, to tell you the truth. So I think that was what we were like going into the mission. There was no real concern about measles and the things that people worry about.
So Milt, about the Apollo curse, okay, I mean, they were tongue in cheek there, because Lovell and I were talking the other day. He said, I figured it out on this virus thing. He said, we had all these things, all these planned events this month and the last hurrah for 50 years. And, maybe you all have many, many more years to come, because, typical, here we go again, the best laid plans. And that's the great resilience. And if there ever was a time in America for a reminder of how team effort works, Apollo 13 story in space and on the ground is the story. And so, Captain Lovell, there in your, as you're incarcerated in your own study there in Lake Forest, Illinois, let me ask you about this. Back to your Gemini years and all the other history with the Navy. But moving on to Apollo 8, you get picked as a crew member for Apollo 8, December of '68. In many ways, what's going on in today's world with all the uncertainty and the craziness, very much like that, just maybe different players and different circumstances. But you, Bill Anders, Frank Borman, first mission to the moon to beat the Soviets, not a landing, but you get there Christmas of 1968. Now, Fred and you were ready on a 13 to be able to be the third mission to walk on the moon. What were you most looking forward to 50 years ago this week, before what happened?
Well,
we were of course looking towards 13 to be the accumulation of my career in space anyway, because I thought that landing on the moon would be the greatest thing for me, and so 13, from the time that we had the problem with the measles, started out to be something different. If you remember, all the little incidents that occurred seemed to add up. We had the engine failure on the second stage, I guess, of the Saturn V, and then we had the sort of the omens, the takeoff on 13, and the explosion on the 13th. So all these things sort of added up to me that this was going to be a different type of a mission.
Okay, hey, for Fred, okay, same real question for you. You were looking forward to, what were you looking forward to most? Putting you on the spot a little bit, describe Jim's mentorship to you on that first mission, realizing he'd already been in space.
well, just to go back a little bit, what I was looking forward to, I had served 2 previous backup assignments on Apollo 8 with Neil and Buzz. We were the backup crew on 8. And then Jim and Ken and I served on the backup of 11, and did not get to fly either time. So I was really looking forward to 13. That was the time I was going to get to really fly and to get to land and hopefully walk on the moon. Just a little bit back in regard to those backup assignments, I can only say that I felt each time as a backup, I could replace the prime the day before launch and go fly the mission. And so I think Jack probably was in that sort of that same boat. He probably missed out on some of the late photo plan changes Ken was making. But other than that, for the Earth orbital aspect of it, I don't think there was any problem with Jack.
Okay, let me ask you this, Jerry Griffin. You, like the others, you are an experienced flight director pre-launch. Were there special items you paid just a little more attention to in this? I mean, at this point, we'd had Apollo 11, Apollo 12. America was kind of getting to this sort of, what are we doing today? Yeah, well, we're landing on the moon again. We're in that mode. So was there something unique to this mission, Jerry Griffin, as you looked at that?
No, not really. What we did, we had it was an interesting time for pre-launch, because we reported to the Cape, and in that whole period of the countdown, which lasted, a couple of days, was we were talking to the launch director and spacecraft test conductor and so forth. So the ops piece of the pre-launch job was very much like what we saw from the very beginning. And by the way, by the time we got to 13, we had been out to the moon 4 times on 8, 10, 11, and 12. And we were getting pretty well. The machine was in cadence and running pretty well. And we had, I think, a very smooth countdown on 13. And then each team in the control center kind of had its own blocking assignment. And for the launch, Milt Windler and his team were the prime blockers. So the rest of us could sit back a little and watch it happen. And by the way, the crew handled and Milt's team handled that engine out on the second stage beautifully. It was almost like nothing happened. And when I went back and listened to the tape after the mission, I thought, man, that's pretty cool. I know there were some big eyeballs involved, but they sure sounded cool.
Well,
You
sometimes
know, Jerry,
Go ahead,
I was
Milt.
going to say, we don't hardly ever talk about that engine note, but that was probably the most critical time on the whole flight.
Yeah.
We were closer to disaster right there than any other time, I think, even after the explosion. Although we didn't, not much we could do about it, and the Saturn V was such a powerful machine that it just kept going.
But the crew thought that this was the one thing that was the bad thing, and everything from then on would be perfect because we already had our problem and we had enough fuel to keep going.
Okay, so Glenn, kind of asking the same question, when you think of pre-launch, what did you have a tendency as a, once again, experienced flight director? Did you look at some things a little bit closer than other things as you were getting ready for the launch?
I don't know that I did myself. I mean, we did what we did, and it was probably each of us had a pattern to it, or maybe not. And I was always comfortable with everything that went on around us, including all the work at the Cape. And when those guys said they were ready, we took them at their word, and they always were right. And so it was a time where we were getting into the mode where we just watched some of what was happening, certainly the countdown. And that happened on this flight. We did manage to get an engine going out at the wrong time. It was kind of like, well, we got ours out of the way, so we're going to be okay, right? When we went to fly it all the way to the moon, we thought we had it made. And life was not like that. The little Verona got here earlier than we liked and stayed.
Okay.
So Glenn, let me ask you this. First of all, I want to give Glenn Lunny and Gene Kranz kudos for breaking out the ties today. Here we are in all of our different socially distanced locations. Leave it to Kranz. He's got the vest on. Marta made him a special surgical mask for today. He hasn't flaunted that yet. Fredo has a mask. Glenn Lunny wears a tie. Always the professional. So Gene Kranz, same question. In terms of the back, was there anything special going into this? Did you feel, even with the triskaidekaphobia of 13, was there any of that?
Well, first of all, I think Glenn and I had to set a stage here. This is the first time I've dressed up in probably about 3 weeks right now. So it almost feels good to put a shirt and tie on. And by the way, this is my Texas Tech tie in honor of number 2 daughter. But basically, I find that when you finish that final day of simulation, you sort of regroup, and it's almost a time to relax. It's mission time now. You can focus upon one thing as opposed to all of the other things, all of the other missions you're working on, the updates to the mission rules and procedures, countdowns, flight plans. So this is a time to basically back off, make sure all the pieces are put together, and look forward to a great mission. There's no more briefings. no more media sessions to have. So I always look at the time after the last simulation as a time to really power down and get ready and focused upon the mission that we're going to fly.
And you know, everybody knows that the mission can't be as bad as the simulations.
Well, and I just want you to know, you heard it here where Gene said to back off. So I heard that also. Jim, you know, it's the Saturn V. You've been there before on Apollo 8. Describe the Apollo 13 launch compared to the Apollo 8 launch.
Well, actually, in the beginning, the Apollo 8 launch was the first time that we were on it, and so everything was new. By the time Apollo 13 came along, I was sort of the old hand, and I was telling both Fred and Jack, okay, here's what's coming up next. Stand by for this. You know, look at the G's, and all of a sudden, when the engines, you know, stopped and then started again, you know, I told them all about the changes. So it was actually the 13 and the Saturn V was an old man's rocket. The G loadings were not that great, and it was very smooth to finally get into orbit and then on the way to the moon.
Hey, Fred Hayes, lunar module pilot. This was your first time. I mean, you all had such tremendous experience. It was all part of the job, and you know, test pilots and all of that. But this Apollo 13 was your first time riding the giant Saturn V, and it's 363 feet, 36 stories. Built by the lowest bidder, as Alan Shepard said, you know, liquid fuel, everything worked perfectly, and now you're on stage. What was it like? Describe it, and what maybe didn't you expect in the launch of the Saturn V?
Well, I compare it to my airplane experience in different ways. Probably the most unusual thing was the control of the first stage, gimbling the 4 outer engines. Wasn't super smooth. I mean, I don't know if they didn't have enough small enough stepping functions or whatever, but it was a little bit herky-jerky. And the most noticeable from an airplane difference was the left to right motions were a lot more than experienced in airplanes. I mean, I've flown special weapons low level at 500 plus knots on a run in at a couple of 100 feet on the thermal rough day. I'd have lacerations from the straps from getting jolted around, but it was less than that. So it really, G level wise, 4.5 peak. Fighter airplanes we flew, even of those older vintage, would pull 6-7 Gs in combat maneuvering. So the G level wasn't that big either compared to airplane experience.
Let me answer one other question there. The Saturn V compared to the Titan on Gemini was totally different. Titan was like an ICBM, and you knew that you were on board, and you were the not the target, but the go ahead. And so there was a ton of difference between Titan and also the Saturn V.
Okay, we started the discussion on the loss of the center engine of the second stage, and kind of for Milt and Jim, you know, you both kind of believing that was going to be the moment that could have caused the most consternation as you continued with the launch and the mission. Talk a little bit more about that, please.
Well, when that happened, and I saw the light come on that we had lost the engine, and I thought to myself, uh-oh, what is going to be the story? And I called, of course, Mission Control, said that I think number 5 or something like that was out. And then when you guys very nicely did all the computation, I should say, of do we have enough fuel? Do we have enough power? Can we still do the mission? We had to, you know, go into Earth orbit first and then go all the way. And they finally said, yep, it can still be done. I breathed a great sigh of relief, and I told Jack and Fred, I said, hey, that's our problem on this mission. Now everything's going to be just right.
And Milt, what were you thinking at that moment? with the team?
Well, you simulate launches ad nauseum, really, and you do them over and over again, and you get kind of used to them, I guess, is the way to say it. And there's not a whole lot of actions you can take unless the machine just completely quits. So it's potentially a really catastrophic situation if the engine, it can explode from pogo. They had problems with that earlier, unmanned, but if everything works, everything else works right, is pretty straightforward. And I want to, right here, we're talking about simulations. That's one group of people that hardly ever get all the credit that they deserve. I think a lot of the success for the whole space program goes to the simulation people. They work hard, and they turn up some things that cause a lot of head scratching in the control center amongst the flight controllers, and they did a really tremendous job. And we did the simulations, we had the debriefings, and all of that was, I think, a major factor in the success of all the space programs.
By the way, for those watching on Facebook Live, either live or archived later on, it's the San Diego Air and Space Museum, a really unique event. You can't get more unique than this, which is the 2 surviving crew members of Apollo 13, the flight directors on the ground who, with the teams on the ground, made it all happen, and these hundreds of thousands of men and women who made Apollo. In these times of tough times, with what we're going through as a nation now, this is a great, current, important tool, not just old-time history. So we appreciate you joining us here on this special digital broadcast. I want to thank again Jim Kidrick. Since I'm the chairman of the board, Mark Larson, we really have a tremendous team. Sandy, the whole team throughout the museum. We've not, things have changed, but the mission continues, including this that we're doing today. So we appreciate your support and this really amazing event to have all of you great American heroes. You won't call yourselves that, but we can call you that, and it's important that we do. And we're so glad you're here, and that you're friends over the years as well. Jerry, tell us a little more about Jerry Griffin, about the first 24 to 48 hours of the typical Apollo mission, because Jim mentioned earlier, Jim Kidrick mentioned earlier, our president and CEO, that you, so many of you worked a lot of these missions. You were there in these glory days, which really foretell the future if we do it right moving forward, especially these days. So, Jerry, what's a typical first 24 to 48 hours of an Apollo mission?
Well, if things go well, it's a pretty calm time. But I've always believed, and I can probably get some disagreement amongst people, that the launch phase, the Saturn launch phase, was probably the hardest part of the mission to make sure we did it right. And by golly, even with the engine out on this flight, those Saturn V's just worked like a charm. And when I think of the technology that they had available in those days, we had available, it's pretty amazing that we never lost one, we never had to board off of one or anything like that. So if the Saturn V, if you got past holding all that energy and keeping it contained and got into orbit, then you had that one final move after about a rev and a half to do translunar injection and head out for the moon. If that went well, then that next 24 hours usually was pretty calm. We had a hiccup, pretty bad one on 14 because they had trouble docking with the lunar module to extract it out of the S4B. But other than that, most of that period usually was pretty quiet. There's a lot of housekeeping. The crew gets pretty tired. The adrenaline is flowing, but they've been up for a heck of a long time. So we tried to get them to rest fairly fast after all of that happened. But that first 24, 48 hours is usually pretty calm. And in fact, it was on 13, if you think about it. It was about 55 hours or 57 hours it got interesting. So, And again, I want to emphasize that the fact that we had done this several times, the repetitiveness helped. It was never easier, but the fact we knew what to expect and what it looked like, what we could hear from the crew, what they could tell us, what they could do, what we could see they couldn't. We had all that pretty well worked out. And so the launch phase turned out to be pretty darn good.
Okay.
Jerry, you might tell them a little bit about how strong the Saturn booster was by telling them about the Apollo 12. I was
Yeah.
really impressed with that operation.
Yeah, that was the launch right before this, and it was my first launch, just like it was Milt's on the Saturn V. And we got hit by lightning. And we had a heck of a time there. Actually, we created our own lightning strikes, but yeah, I thought that one was probably down the tube. But we pulled it out, and again, it was the Saturn V instrument unit, which was the launch computer, held in just fine. The lightning didn't strike it. It didn't. I guess it liked Huntsville, Alabama. It kind of like it held them all. But yeah, but like I say, if you can get past that launch phase, it's generally pretty quiet for the next 24, 48 hours.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, Gino. Working with the Apollo 13 crew, of course, you knew all these astronauts. What made them easy to work with from the mission control standpoint, and why? Or in some cases, what made them tough to work with? Especially knowing Jim and Fredo, it had to be a challenge, right?
Well, let me go back to the launch phase. Everybody talks about the launch phase. And Kraft, I think, said it right. When you're writing the mission rules, you buy the risk for the entire mission during launch. So you got to make that risk pay off. And that was one of the things as you go through mission rules, you make this trade-off, risk versus gain, going through the rest of the mission. And I think Kraft's guidance in the early days was really great in establishing that principle. I think the toughest part about working with the Apollo 13 crew was with Ken Mattingly, because he was the smartest guy I've ever known. He always had the ability to ask the questions I wish that I had been smart enough to ask. And I think that generally the interface during the course of the mission isn't as much with the prime crew as it is with the backup and the capcoms. And the capcoms are those that basically carry the message on what happened during the training when the crew wasn't there, how the mission rule sessions go, some of the trade-offs and flight plans. And it's basically as you come up in the milestones and buy off in the mission rules, buy off in the mission policies, buy off in the flight plan, that basically we get into the prime crew. And the prime crew, from our standpoint, was Ken Mattingly, and like I say, he was absolutely a whiz.
We missed him on the prime crew.
Yeah, Jim Lovell, tell us a little more about the humor of Fred Hayes, who was sitting there just very calm, cool, collected here. And tell us about the cabin repressurization valve.
Well, this is an old thing that Fred Hayes liked to do on the crew, especially during our training period. He would, and on the way up, he would turn when he was in the lunar module, turn the cabin repressurization valve, and it sounded like a bang to us. And so we'd always get a start, and then we look up at Fred, and he'd have that grin on his face, like, hey, I got you again.
What else did he pull on you on the humor side? Because it's a long trip. About 3 days to the moon. You don't expect to have the oxygen tank blow when it's stirred and all of that. But what else did Fredo do? We're among friends, the statute of limitations. It's been 50 years. Tell us something.
Well, I'm not too sure. He was a very competent person. If he did something, occasionally he'd, like the repressurization valve. But other than that, he was right in there with us. Maybe I missed something.
Yeah.
Fred, you want to confess anything while we're here,
Yeah.
Fredo?
Hold on here, hold on here.
Yeah, I'd
Let's
have to
not
say
go-
after 48 hours, at the first 48 hours, that was sort of cool. Jerry was talking about, there wasn't much humor beyond that by any of us.
Well, and that's actually where we were going, Fred. Okay, so, here we are approaching that 56th hour. Okay, something happens, and maybe you could share that with us, and what were your first thoughts?
Well, the first thing that we had to do, in case we all forgot, was the fact we had to get off the free return course. I think that Mission Control looked at what our landing area would be as we circled the moon, and found out that the sun would be on top of us and would wash out the lunar surface. And so very nicely, you said we better get a different course, and that's what first thing we did when everything was fine.
Okay, Fred, the explosion.
Well, that happened when Jim and I had just finished an Academy Award TV show, and I was putting away things we had pulled out to talk about. Jim had already closed out the show, and it was heading up, I think, up to the command module through the tunnel, and we had this big bang. We're sitting in metal spacecraft, so it was like something hit on it, and there was some jets firing, the small 100-pound thrusters firing, a little bit of motion you could detect in the vehicle, not very much. And I followed Jim shortly, heading upstairs. There were a lot of lights on. I think there were 6 or 7 caution and warning lights on, which was a lot of confusion because they were across systems that had no relation to each other. And I could see why people in Mission Control were confused too, seeing that, they thought it was maybe a caution warning instrumentation type problem. Because I think I guess a philosophy followed by those simulator trainers that was Milt talked about. They followed a philosophy that God would not be so unkind as to give us more than one failure at one time. And here it looked like we had a bunch of failures. It turned out many of them were false because the G-shock of the explosion had rocked Parker valves, overcome the spring tension, and closed some gaseous and liquid valves from their open positions to closed positions. And of course, we couldn't see that on our instrument panel, but telemetry to the ground told them, and they had us recycle switches, so a lot of those lights went away. But the one that hit me right away was looking at the cryogenics. It was clear that meters in 2 meters on tank 2, oxygen tank 2, were in the bottoms, and I knew without reference anything that meant an abort, and I was just sick to my stomach that I knew we had lost the landing.
And of course, you got ECOM, you have Cy Lieber got back there saying stir the Kairos and all of that. Jim, Commander Lovell. So walk us through a little more of what was going on. Take us back to that time 50 years ago this week. You heard the explosion, and much has been written about, and Houston, we have a problem, and all the comments, and of course, Gene Kranz's failure is not an option. What was your first thought when you knew it wasn't Fredo and the captain, the cabin repressurization valve? How quickly did you transmit to Mission Control? Of course, you're all cool as you do this, of course, like nothing's going on. You sound calm, cool, collected. Describe the atmosphere in the command module in that moment, Jim.
Well, as Fred said, we were together, and we had just finished the TV program sent down to Mission Control. They of course sent it out to all 3 networks, and naturally no one carried it. And I was on my way down when I heard the explosion. At first I thought that maybe that Fredo was trying to do another funny thing by throwing the repress valve. But then I looked up at his face, and I could tell from his expression that he had no idea. Then I got down into the command module, and as I was going down, I looked at Jack Swigert's face, and I could tell he had no idea. And then he had seen the light come on and heard the explosion. And he's the one that said, Houston, we have a problem here. When I got down, I saw the light on that said that 2 out of 3 of our fuel cells have just died.
Wow.
And that's when the consultation about, hey, what is the story here? What's going to happen? And we started thinking about that we really had a problem.
Okay, Gene, you hear this over the radio. Describe, your white team's initial reaction. What were the consuls telling you? You're handing off your white team shortly to Glenn, and ultimately, shortly after that, you retreated to a location to begin the assessment. So, you've gotten this call over the radio. Okay, where are you going with it with your team?
I actually went through 3 different phases mentally. We had just finished that television show. The wives and families had gone home. Glenn was sitting next to me at the console preparing for handover. We had just finished the pre-sleep checklist. We got into the cryostar. And when I heard the words, Houston, we got a problem. I immediately went back to 2 of the glitches electrically we had earlier in my shift. We had an unexplained antenna switch, and we had a cryo sensor problem. And I immediately thought, well, that's another electrical problem. We'll put the crew to sleep, then we'll start working the problem. For about the first 60 seconds, voice loops were literally chaotic. The controllers indicated a computer restart, main bus undervolt. All these problems came in, and I immediately had conflicting data. Buck Willoughby was on there, and basically he indicated that he was seeing valid telemetry, and some of the jet valves were closed, and Cy Liebergott was basically indicating that he didn't believe the data. Well, Willoughby finally said they had a pretty big bang. This is about 3 to 4 minutes into this pretty big bang associated with it. And that immediately downloaded to a different phase of mind that we don't know what's going on, so proceed carefully and don't screw up. And then when Jim finally said, hey, we're venting something, it went into survival mode. So it was actually down mode through 3 different steps. Now, one of the issues I had was I only had one Lunar module controller in the room, and basically he was just updating his procedures down there, because generally we had smaller shifts during the transit period, and everybody was getting organized for the lunar phase of the mission. So I was working principally with the guys in the module at that time and hoping that somebody would show up in the lunar. They did relatively soon. But through this whole process, Glenn pulled off an intuitive move there. He went down to the trench, and literally within about 20 minutes, he came up with 5 different return to Earth options. A couple going around the front side of the moon, what they call a direct abort, and a couple going around the back side of the moon. So Glenn was already working in how are we going to get him back? As we were trying to get the crew, basically we indicated that we're now in the lifeboat mode, get the crew over to the lunar module, get the lifeboat checklist out, and figure out what is the minimum power level over there in the lunar module to sustain life. And that was basically, we had made the decision we're going around the moon, and Glenn picked up this mess from then on.
Well, it's amazing thinking 50 years ago today was Splashdown Day after that harrowing experience. And I think it'd be a good moment here just to quickly acknowledge crew member Jack Swigert. The fact that he passed away years ago, as you all know, but our viewers may not know, he had been elected to Congress, and then before being, sworn in, ready to serve, he had passed away. And there's a beautiful statue of him in his Apollo spacesuit in the U.S. Capitol. And once we get past the virus, every American should go back and see that and remember. Glenn Lunny, so we're going from the white team with Gene Kranz. You're coming on with your black team there at NASA Mission Control. It's so well done by the Mission Control movie here in the last couple of years. The explosion changed everything. It changed the entire focus of the mission. Describe the atmosphere. Here you're coming on, you're kind of clocking in. and all hell's breaking loose. What now?
That's exactly what was going through my mind. What's going to happen now? But it didn't last very long. We had been training for problems like this, for 10 years together. And what we got into was something that took all of our skills and all of our luck to pull off. And we gradually began to realize that after the discussion of the noise and the splashing and the noise and the running down, getting it ourselves under control. The interesting thing to me was it was really curious because we just kept doing what we were trained to do. And we, probably everybody had a moment in their private self, but none of it that was overwhelming, and none of it stayed. So people were reacting very well, exactly the way they had been trained, and they were. And we did a lot of things, but we didn't do a lot of unnecessary things. And that was a credit to the training that we had. And here we were, frankly, most of us being almost 10 years in this business. And some of the guys were not that experienced. And it was comforting to look around and say, oh yeah, so-and-so's here. And it didn't take any length of time for it to fill up. The control center filled up, and it was not chaos. It was calm down, and we're here to get a job done. And that's one of these cases where there wasn't any big run on the problem by the guys in the control center. They all sat down. They knew what they had to do, and the problem was spread out enough so that almost everybody was engaged, 100%, and they stayed that way. They stayed that way the whole time. But certainly in the first clearing time, maybe the first hour or two for us, we got our taste of what it really was to be frightened by what was happening in the vehicle. So God bless them all. Everybody captured themselves and did well, and they performed as well as we could ask. And it was a wonderful thing to watch, coming back into it, like replaying it, and coming back into it was an incredible experience to turn the whole thing over again in your mind, because so much had gone wrong that needed to be fixed or whatever, and the guys reacted just the way they were supposed to.
By the way, before Jim Kidrick's going to take the next question here, but I want our viewers to know, because it's easy if you're just tuning in, if you're part of the 2 or 3 generations and you're saying, what is this Apollo 13? Why does it matter? What does it mean to me? I mean, the teamwork alone in today's coming back as America after the virus is huge. Let's remember that these gentlemen who we're talking with here, who made history, the average age of mission control back in the day, 50 years ago, was about 30. These were the whippersnappers, chain smoking in many cases, in the short sleeve shirts and the nice narrow ties and all the stuff you saw in the movie. But you were the rebel. You were the very orderly engineering rebel, but you were the risk takers. And I want America to know that. So we see this often with veterans, from the wars and so forth. You say, well, there's some older gentlemen. And you go, man, if you need to hear the story, and the opportunity to hear the story right now is phenomenal. Again, thanks to Jim and our whole museum team for pulling this together today here on Facebook Live.
Yeah, but you forget those skinny ties are back in, Mark. Okay.
I know. And by the way, for those of you playing along at home, none of us are wearing pants right now.
I
Who knows?
Jim, I got a comment if you got 60 seconds here.
Absolutely, Gene, please.
One of the, for my shift, I think the real key unsung hero was a guy by the name of Gary Scott. Here the spacecraft is moving around and that guy continued to select the right antenna so we could keep communicating, literally for the best part of an hour. And that guy never missed a beat. We never lost comm. And then once our leadership, Chris Craft and NASA bosses came in, they were more, how can we help you kind of thing. So what can we contribute and help you do your job?
Well, that's great. Great credit. Jerry, everyone's taking in all this information. They're analyzing it. What were your thoughts? And as Milt had indicated a little while ago, the importance of simulations and what Mattingly was doing and how was this all coming together and gelling?
Well, it gelled from a lot of different angles. And that was one of the interesting things about 13. We felt bad that Ken Mattingly wasn't on the crew, but we were happy to have Jack. And it turns out Jack probably spent more time in the command module at Downey, California, where they built them, working on emergency procedures and all kinds of mission rule implications, single point failures, that kind of thing. And then we had Fred Hayes, who likewise was exactly the same on the Lunar module. Spent more time in Bethpage, where they made it, than anybody. And so it turned out we had these two great crewmen that knew their spacecraft inside and out. On the ground, Glenn hit on it, and partially Gene too. There was a team spirit in that room. A lot of people thought that we were all kind of punched out of the same mold, but we weren't. We came from all over the country, little bitty colleges, big universities, farm boys, city boys. But when we walked into that control center, there was a feeling, and I think I'm going to steal one of Glenn's lines here, it's like walking in a cathedral. It really did feel like a very, very special place. And I know I can remember when Jim and I was about an hour after the explosion before I got back to the control center. And I was listening to him, and I can remember thinking, I'm in there with them. I'm trying to visualize what they were doing. I did that on every mission. And I think a lot of people did, trying to visualize what the crew was doing, what the spacecraft was doing, what the data was telling us. And so it was, and besides that, we were young and we had a lot of energy, now, Glenn was the youngest flight director. And I was I was 35. Old guys were Winter and Kranz, they were 37, I think, or something. But we had a bunch of kids in that room, and they were incredible, and just incredible. And we had enough energy in that group that we could last that 3.5 days. I don't think many of us slept at all. I know the crew didn't on board, and we didn't sleep very much on the ground, but we could handle it. So that team is, to me, it is the greatest team of people that's ever been assembled for anything. And then Gene hit one thing I wanted to emphasize. Our leadership in that era is not the same today. It's not the same in corporate America. It's not the same in NASA. They let us do our thing. They shove decisions down, not elevate them. And so we could make decisions, 35-year-old, 30-year-olds, that, and it kept us, we could make things happen in a hurry.
Yeah.
And the leadership absolutely wanted to support us. And that's what they told us.
Sure, I would, can I speak?
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay. Jerry was certainly there the most of the time, except for the front end, but he was taking it all in and pumping it up. and getting ready to go on shift. I don't know what he was thinking but it had to be kind of a scary set of thoughts running through his head when he knew that he was going to be going on in an hour or 2 or 3 and help to satisfy this problem. But I want to tell you a story about an administrator of NASA. Tom Paine was a relatively new administrator, and we didn't know him very well, but he had George Lowe beside him. George was the in-house deputy, and he was watching out for Tom Paine. And I'm sure my sense is that the change with Tom Paine was easy because George had a lot of feelings with the people. He certainly knew this and so on. At any rate, Jerry and I went to a briefing of the management and what are we going to do now kind of a session. And I and Jerry went into the room thinking, holy Christ, what are we going to do here? Because it's filled up. The room was filled up with brass of all kinds in there. And, they were generally inquisitive and a pain in the neck sometimes, but they gave us a scrubbing. But in this case, I was the first one to tell the story about what had happened and what we knew and what we didn't know. And Tom Paine listened to that for a while, and he said, boy, that's kind of interesting. And he said, Jerry and I were wondering what was going to come when he got in the seat. And lo and behold, he said to us, I only have one question for you guys. And Jerry and I looked at each other and he said, what can we do to help you? Can you tell us? And, it was like, wow, that changed that, that the other guy out of the room in a big hurry. And it was a beautiful thing. And I must admit, I was not as clever as I should be. And I didn't pick up on it and, make some statement that would be appropriate. I just said, we think we got it covered. And if we need anything, we'll come back and tell you what we need. But the more I think about that, the more I say to myself, that's what NASA was in that time. It was the kind of team it was, and the management structure and all the performers in it. It was incredible, and it was that question every once in a while Gene and I talk about, what can we do to help you guys? And here I am, 30 years old, 32 years old maybe, and the whole thing is hanging by a thread, and they just backed us up. In effect,
and you're coming, and you're coming on board, and you're bringing your team on board. It's amazing. I want to mention right here that for those just tuning in, if you're watching this on San Diego Air and Space Museum on Facebook, you get the movie that came out a couple of years ago, Mission Control, the Unsung Heroes of Apollo. Because these are the guys. We all know about the crew. We all know what was going on, or you've read about it if you didn't experience it, as so many of us did. Think about the time. Think about the context. Think about the risks. Think about the people who would these days be there saying, no, you can't do that. Let's talk to legal counsel, whatever. This all comes together phenomenally well. And that makes all the difference in the world. So see that movie to understand these individuals, and then the hundreds of thousands of people who made Apollo happen on the ground. Milt, I want to ask you about, by the way, before I get to that, I want to ask you, Glenn, because I'm curious. I know you started at NASA before it was NASA, right back to NACA, NACA. So who has the longest tenure among the group here of you flight directors? Who started when? Just real quick.
I
started
think
in
Gene and I
1954.
started at the same time. I think Gene and I started at the same time. It was in the fall of 67, I think. And
57,
57, yep.
57, yeah.
So I was on my co-op in 57, and I got out of it in the next spring in the 60s. And it was a magical time. I was asked.
So Jerry, you and Milt. Yeah, Jerry, you and Milt, when did you start?
1964, when I got out of the Air Force. I tried to go to work 1 year earlier, but Kranz lowballed me on the salary and we couldn't get together on price. So I finally got a guy named Mel Brooks who worked for Kranz hired me. And so I've always held that over Gene, that he lowballed me on salary and I turned him down. Actually, it was Jim Tomberlin.
I started in 1954, actually, and I was working for NACA and high-speed propeller research. So I went into service for 4 years or close to it. When I came out, instead of doing propellers, we were talking about landing on them, sending men into space. And that was in 58.
You are the winner. If I had a prize, Jim and I would give you a prize. Kidrick and I would give you some. So Milt, you're lead flight director. How confident were you as Apollo 13 unfolded? How confident were you in your mission control team, all the different teams, and why? And what made this emergency different? You test for this. You go through the procedural checklists. And did you ever think that this wasn't going to end well, that they weren't going to get back safely?
Not really. I don't think anybody thought that it was hopeless. And everybody, because it was always something that we could do. It was some confusion, as Gene had already talked about in the first few minutes. And then it was pretty much people were saying this is a plan, and Glenn's team laid out the plan and smoothed everything out. But I think we all thought that there was a way out of this. And as people kept working and getting the power requirements down and the resources we had were starting to extend past the length of time that we needed to use them. And then it's been mentioned that Glenn came back up with several, being an old flight trajectory guy, FIDO and all that. He came up with several ideas from the trajectory people, flight dynamics people. So people always had ideas, and it wasn't. I don't think anybody ever felt like it was hopeless. I don't think anybody I talked to did. We all were busy doing things. We were killing snakes, and they were dying, and we were kept going.
Well, it sounds like you killed the right snakes.
Yeah.
For Jim, okay, so Fred, Jack, and you are, assessing the physical structure of your service module, and what were you seeing? And when did that fighter pilot, test pilot mentality kick in for you?
Well, let me explain that. First of all, my two companions, Jack, of course, did a lot of work on the malfunction procedures, so he was a great replacement if I had to have one. And Fredo, of course, worked with Grumman for some time, so he knew the Lunar module pretty good. So I couldn't ask for another couple of people. Now, at the time of the explosion, you have to think about this a little bit. When did it happen? If that happened at exactly the right time to permit a recovery. If the explosion had occurred once we first committed ourselves to a flight to the moon at a high rate of speed, we probably would not have enough consumables in the lunar module to get all the way around the moon and back again for a safe landing. If the explosion occurred after we had burned into lunar orbit, or heaven forbid on the lunar surface, well, we wouldn't be doing this today. So the timing of the explosion was very, very important, and actually maybe it was a little gift we got that allowed that to happen and to allow the Apollo 13 flight to be successful enough to talk about.
Let me ask you this, Fred Hayes. Fred Hayes, you hear you're a lunar module pilot on Apollo 13 50 years ago this week. You joined NASA as an very experienced fighter pilot, test pilot. What did you know right away? What's the protocol? When did you realize the mission had changed to a recovery and rescue mission? And then talk about the reaction. Walk us through that time as if it were right now, this week.
Well, as I said, when we got, they passed the first bang, and I got into the command module and looked at things. Within a first minute, I surmised from the instruments we had lost one of the 2 oxygen tanks, which meant an abort. So almost within that first minute, I knew we had lost the landing. It then got into a troubleshooting routine. Incidentally, I'll digress a little bit about the control team that I was extremely impressed with probably 30 years later. I did get to review all the inner loops in mission control. And you have to appreciate that at the time we were going through the troubleshooting, first of all of that work that was done, and the people in mission control working with the support rooms next door, different disciplines, had to be ad-libbed. I mean, there was no ready procedure. So they were inventing things on how to stop that leak. When they had run out of ideas at a point, that's when Glenn told them they had to get the command module shut down, that we were eating into the little entry batteries we would need for entry. And immediately they went back to work, but the same way, there was no procedure on how to shut down the command module. The vehicle was never supposed to be shut down in flight. So it was the same kind of, it was totally on their basis of their knowledge of the vehicle and the systems that allowed them to professionally argue through that process, thinking that sort of in the back of their minds, I guess, is what I got out of the discussions, of worrying about not hurting anything as they got the vehicle powered down, because they were already thinking at that point, we're going to need to get this thing back up and powered up to get them through entry. So right then, none of the crew that were wrestling with those problems, even at that time, right after the explosion, had certainly not given up the ghost, and that made me feel good.
Gene, you're known for a pretty well-known statement saying failure is not an option. And tell us a little bit more about that, but also the importance of bringing your team closer during situations like this.
Well, what was after Glenn had taken over the shift, I moved into what was called the data room. They call it the Tiger team, but it's down in room 210 in mission control. We knew that we had to come up with a long-term plan. The simulators by now were up, they were cranking along. And fortunately, I was able to get some of the, what I'd say, brilliant controllers. John Aaron, Jerry Griffin talked about the lightning strike. John was one of the key members of that team. He goes all the way back to the Gemini program. But John picked up, I assigned him the responsibilities for management of all the resources. There's another guy that turned out to be very important, Arnie Aldridge. And basically, he'd been in the back room. He was one of the good CSM guys. And I gave him the job to basically manage configuration control of the checklists as they evolved. And basically, he took us through 4 different configurations of checklist as we were getting ready to do the get home fast maneuver, the parasynthian +2. And he also did the same thing from a standpoint of the reentry checklist. So Arnie and John Aaron were 2 of the key principals there. Now the speech, basically, we spent basically about an hour, and we listened to all the concerns that the various engineers and controllers had brought in. We were starting to get inputs from the crews over in the simulators by now. And basically they were concerned the batteries may freeze, propellants may freeze, we had all the list of concerns. How do we navigate? How do we get back through the Earth's atmosphere? And we had these all tabulated in the blackboard there. and assigned John Aaron to handle the resource problem, Aldridge to handle the consumables. And then we split into very smaller teams to address each one of the items on the blackboard. Before we dispersed to the various teams we had, I gave them we never lost America in space. We sure as hell aren't going to lose one now. This crew is coming home. You got to believe it. Your team must believe it, and we must make it happen. And that was too long for Hollywood. And I think it was Jerry Bostic, I think, came up with those words as a result when they were doing the scripting for the movie.
So Glenn Lundy, I mean, I got to tell you, for those watching this, I mean, some of us still, let's be frank, some of us still can't program our VCR from the old days. And we're doing all this technology with all these different boxes here and all the Zoom technology and so forth. This is like the best episode of the Brady Bunch ever. But Glenn Lundy, let me ask you about this. Tell us, as you're coming on with your team, some of the key decisions on your watch once you're in the hot seat there at Mission Control on Apollo 13.
Well, there were a raft of things going around, and you know, in my job as it was the flight director, I had to be sure that we were doing the best and the most we could with the resources that we had. Resources including and meaning people, and it was impressive. We've talked about this a little bit already, but it was really impressive to see the performance that we got out of people. And you know, we were never thought of ourselves as grade A wizards or anything like that. We were not high jinx guys in terms of degrees, but we knew what we were doing, and we knew what was expected of us, and we all knew what we had to do. And God bless them, they really turned to, and I didn't have to give them any speech or anything. They just knew what to do, and they went at it. And I look back on them and say, man, those guys are really pretty good. And anyway, it was a satisfying time, and everything that we had ever learned probably got used a couple of times in the response to Apollo 13's explosion, and it worked well.
Okay, Jerry, you know, you've talked a lot about the Mission Control team, its strengths and can-do spirit, and you know, you're bringing your gold team on board, and you know, you're realizing now the severity of the explosion, some of the challenges. And, you know, when you look at some of the major milestones for the gold team being led by you, what were you thinking at that time?
Well, it was a wake-up call. I had, as I said earlier, I came into the control center about an hour after the explosion. In fact, I'd been out playing a softball game and a night game. And I came back in and found out. It took me about, by the way, I walked into the control center this an hour after the explosion. As Glenn said, there were more people in the room, but it was very, very calm. And professional, and people were chugging through. I stayed long enough to realize it was severe as it was. And then I don't know, I guess it was Milt had worked up a new schedule for the teams, and I looked, and I was going to relieve Glenn. And so I tried to go home and get some sleep, which I didn't do. But I finally took a shower and came home, or came back to the control center. But that whole time, there was a feeling, and it's been said more than once here already, that we never talked about not getting them back. It was just, what do we got to do to get this thing, get them home? And so it was just a shift of mission. I had been thinking all along, I was supposed to do the lunar landing. The gold team was going to do the lunar landing. And I was probably as excited about that as as Lovell and Hayes were. But that didn't take long to so that ain't going to happen. So let's get on with the mission as it's been redefined. And everybody went to work to save consumables and get it back. Gene's team being offline for a while there to kind of assess everything really helped. One of the things you learn in this business in flight ops, it was the same thing when in flying airplanes in the Air Force, Kidrick, not the Navy. You don't do anything real fast if you're not sure what you're going to do, because you don't want to make the problem worse. And Gene even said that. I know, no guessing here. Let's keep focused and get it done. So the strength of the team came through, and it did it. Every mission had problems ranging from nagging to very serious. And that's what the simulations prepared us for. We hadn't prepared exactly to have an O2 tank explode, but we had talked about using the LEM as a lifeboat. We had also run tests on maneuvers around the moon and that sort of thing. I've always said that simulations were kind of like a marathoner running out on the beach. And then when he got out on the pavement and started running, it really was easier. The flights, by and large, except for 13, flights were easier than the sims by quite a bit.
Well, hold on just a second. I've got to make one comment about the Navy side. Because,
the Navy.
well, we always use the example is that, the master caution light comes on, things are starting to drop offline, and, you've got your bold-faced, procedures, your rope memory and all that. And we used to jokingly say the first procedure was to wind the clock. And someone would ask you, well, why are you going to wind the clock? And it was literally so you didn't do anything wrong. Why shut it all down if you're not going to have to shut it down? So I certainly understand that.
That's great stuff. That's Jim Kidrick, our president and CEO, the driving force, along with Sandy, the CFO, and our great team, the men and women who make the San Diego Air and Space Museum happen. If you're just tuning in on Facebook Live, either live or in archive form later on, this is an amazing event. That's an overused word these days, amazing. But in these times of the virus and all the other things going on in America, if there ever was a time for the lessons of Apollo 13 and the can-do spirit of this country, this is it. And this week, on this day, on this, what would have been the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 13 splashdown, thanks to the people in Mission Control, and yes, the crew members, Jim Lovell, the commander, the captain, Fred Hayes, lunar module pilot, the late Jack Swigert, all of this. We have a whole generation or two who think that Tom Hanks was really the guy on Apollo 13. I mean, he's a great friend, a great supporter, but this is important, and we're so glad you're here with us today. You'll see a screen prompt once in a while from Ruben on our team, who will ask you to text to Apollo. This is a tough time for all museums. It's a tough time for everybody in America. Thanks to Jim and his team. I'm just going to take as chairman of the board a little time out here just to say how much we appreciate the educational aspect of our team. We're doing San Diego Air and Space TV, Sadasm TV on our website. We may be physically closed, but we're not closed. America's not closed. The spirit of America is not closed. This is what we do. Apollo 13's legacy is this. And to be able to sit here with the people who made Apollo 13 what it is. And I feel so blessed, and I know, Jim, you do too, to just be here. Thank you again for putting this all together. And no, we're not done with the broadcast yet, but this is such a phenomenal thing to hear these stories in a way that will never be told again in this way with this assemblage of people. It's just, it's phenomenal. I want to thank my buddy Joe Graham, my long-suffering flight instructor, for letting me sit in his airplane hangars and steal his airplanes once in a while, which gives us a good venue. But may we always have that spirit of adventure and risk-taking. And if there ever was a time, whether you're in aviation and space or not, just an American life, use this positively today. And again, thanks to all you gentlemen for being part of this as well. Jim and Fred, Jim Lovell and Fred Hayes, take us through 50 years ago this week. Take us through your actions, working with Mission Control, these gentlemen and their team, to make key life-saving decisions, trajectory, PC +2, where you're going to live for a while. It's a whole different thing. Yes, you trained for it, but you didn't think you'd have to actually do it. So take us back to that time and bring it to life.
You want us to take us back to the time frame, of course, when the explosion first occurred.
Yeah, and then what subsequently happened after that?
Well, let me put it this way. We didn't really know what was going to happen. And consequently, we looked at each other. As a matter of fact, when the explosion first occurred, one of the thoughts was that we were hit by a meteorite. And therefore, I said to Jack, because Fred was down in the command module, said, Jack, put the hatch back on and let's separate the lunar module from the command module in case that was hit, and we soon be out of air. And Jack went up to put the hatch back in, and believe it or not, he couldn't do it. And I said, wait a second, Jack, just put it down there on the couch and we'll forget about it, because by that time, if there was a meteorite, we'd have been dead by that time. So it was a case of slowly figuring out what happened with the three of us coming down. And Fred mentioned it quite nicely. The fact that the light had come down, we've lost power on two of our fuel cells. And then when I looked out the window and saw a gas escaping from the back end of my spacecraft, I realized, like Jack said earlier, or that Fred said earlier, that the mission is, no longer the way it was, that we are going to have to come back survival. And that was the survival.
Fred?
But it was very fortunate that explosion occurred at the right time.
But it did.
I can't emphasize that too much, because if it had too early or too late, well, it'd have been a whole different story.
Or when you're on the moon. Fredo, your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts of how do we get the LIM powered up, because it became apparent that we're going to lose the mothership. It was going to have to be completely shut down. And obviously the only spacecraft left was the LIM. So we got very busy, Jim and I, in the LIM powering it up. We didn't have to ad lib that too much, because we had an activation checklist that we would have used to power it up the next day in lunar orbit. And we skipped some steps. I knew we didn't need radars. We didn't need VHF, UHF, comm, things like that. So there were kind of several sections of the checklist as we went through. We just X through those steps to not even worry about powering up those items to get to the point where Jim manually loaded in the noun 20 angles. These are the angles out of the inertial measuring unit in the command module to manually punch them in the DSKY keyboard that would align our IMU, our inertial platform, in the LIM to correspond to that, we hoped, very accurate alignment that we had in the mothership before it died, because we knew we'd need that to do any further maneuvers that would be requested to get back.
And Fredo, do you recall that I had mission control just check my arithmetic?
Right, yeah, double check.
Were you still working the 2 + 2 problem, or anyway? So Glenn, you've been talking about, and we all have been talking about, the tough decisions that are being made, especially as we continue this process, realizing, we need to get the spacecraft back to Earth. What was the 1, 2, or 3 most important decisions you believed had to be made and executed?
Well, that's a good question. I hadn't thought about it this way, but we certainly wanted to be able to keep the knowledge that we had in the command module guidance system. We wanted to keep that for long enough time that we could put it into the lunar module computer, and in effect, we would then have 2 computers. And of course, we kept the computer in the command and service module. That stayed up for a while, but it was stayed up because we didn't want to let it go. And it was one of the key decisions that we made. And then the rest of the stuff was a little bit of a blur. We had a lot of people that wanted to do this or that, but it was surprising. And these guys can talk to about it from what their experience was. It just seemed like we didn't need a orchestrator, a leader. I guess that's what we were, but it didn't feel that way exactly. We were doing what we had to do, and whatever we had to bring to bear, we did. And we had this great team of young people, some of them out of school 4 years or so, and they were doing a crackerjack job. And God bless them, they stayed right on top of everything they needed to know, and they're going to have something over in other places, and you're going to hear the same stuff from people from a different point of view, probably, but they will all probably talk or sound like us when they come on. I think I'll watch some of it just to see what it's like when they come on like that. Jared, what do you think? You see them?
Yeah, it's funny, you know, the people had the challenge is what inspired them. We didn't have many people that were asked to leave Mission Control. We had a few that left because they didn't like the pressure, let me call it that, for want of a better word. But by the time we got to Apollo 13, we had these young people and middle-aged guys that were 35, true middle age at that point, and they were all focused on getting the job done. And the fact that it wasn't going well was no reason to despair. It just kept going. And as Glenn was saying, we didn't have to do a lot of prodding to get something out of them. A couple occasions, but it was more when we needed an answer right then that something was going on. They were busy doing something else. Most of the time, they were coming to us with ideas, and so it was kind of a perfect storm of talent, personalities, and never give up attitude.
All right, Milton
Use a
Whitler.
different analogy than perfect storm, Jerry. I wish you used a different analogy than perfect storm for that.
Yeah, maybe a
Well, the
perfect
storm was on
calm.
Apollo
Is a
12
good
launching
thing.
into the thunderstorm. Hey, Milton
Yeah.
Windler, let me ask you this. Describe as Mission Control understood the environmental conditions the astronauts were experiencing and plans to make it better. You watch the Apollo 13 movies, so many people have. The closest thing to the reality in this, the temperature in the capsule, everyday things of life, just breathing, functioning, trying to rest.
Well,
Walk us through it.
I really didn't appreciate how cold they were, I don't guess. I know that the temperature kept dropping, and it was a problem to them. They couldn't sleep, and they did the thing with the hot dog. I guess somebody did. That Swigert did hit somebody with a frozen hot dog, and but I didn't. I really didn't have as good a feel for that situation as I probably should have. We did wind up giving the crew some early on warm up by turning the systems on when it was obvious when we got close in that we had enough power to do that. In fact, we wound up, I think, with about 6 hours of power excess, if you want to call it that way. Even after pumping up the command module batteries that y'all were alluded to earlier. But so we were able to do that. And I think it took about 2 hours, I think, didn't it, Jim or Fred, to get the temperature up to where it felt reasonably comfortable. which was still several hours before the entry. But anyway, that was one thing I guess I didn't really appreciate.
For Jerry, we use the term PTSD. That's kind of the today term. How is mission control holding up, and what did everyone do together, to ensure calmness in mission control through this process?
Let me tell a quick story. I worked on the movie as a technical advisor, and Ron Howard had this thing where he had to have a lot of motion in every scene. He said, and he told me, he said, you only do stills when it's either landscape for some reason or a love scene. Besides that, you need motion. So he had all these people moving in the background. I kept telling him, that's not the way it was. He said, I know, but I'm not making a documentary. And so I let it go. The calm factor, I think, was just a piece of our DNA of the people in there. And in terms of PTSD, there may have been somebody that after all this was over, I didn't know of anybody that suffered any kind of mental anguish. And as a matter of fact, as I said earlier, it was the challenge that kind of kept us going. It was, by God, we can beat this thing. We can get this done. And so we didn't give up. And we were trained to keep going till you ran out of options, and we never ran out of options. We got close on a couple. Water, I think, was probably our shortest. Fred would know that better than me, but I think we had that group that they wanted to be challenged, and it'd been a lot more fun if everything was easier and all that. But when it was all done, there was a sense of satisfaction. And it was like making a tough landing in an airplane when things aren't going right, and you get it on the ground and you head for the club to get a libation. And it was very much like that. I can't say enough about our spouses. Our spouses ran the households, and we didn't get to see our kids play much Little League or anything like that. We were too busy. We were working too many hours. Now, you would think that would wear you down, but in that era, as I said, there was something magic going on. We were all hitting on the right cylinders, and we had these great spouses that took care of the bank account, the kids, Little League, all of that, and left us to be free to get people to the moon and back.
Jerry.
Amen, Jerry.
Yeah, before I get to the next question from Gene Kranz, I got to say this, Jerry, when you just talked about how we are, we can lick this. The attitude was like, we've got this. We can figure out how to do this. If there ever was a lesson for today, what we're going through in this time of the virus, I mean, that's a huge lesson that why it matters. Gene Kranz, we were talking about spouses that make a difference. Gina, when you're famous for the crew cut and the vest, and you became almost a composite character at Apollo 13 because Ron Howard didn't have time to tell all of your stories all together. But how many vests did your wife Marta make for you? Do you have a count? The vests like you're wearing today?
The best guess in the vest was somewhere in the order of about 40. And the key thing is that we had no clue of the value of the vest. We had some problems financially with some of my controllers, and we'd hand the vest off to Command Service Module Branch to basically raffle it off in the house. And they collect some money to address financial issues we had. From a standpoint of the movie, when we got ready to send one out, we had to get it appraised, and we had no clue what it was worth. And the appraisal came back at about $15,000. Well, this was this was much too late for me because I had cleaned the closet, got rid of about 20 of these guys and went into the rag bag at the thrift shop. So the other one was given for church building funds and basically a couple others in museums. Let me back up a bit though. One of the things that Kevin discussed was performance contract we had, both Grumman, North American, and a lot of the subs they had. And we have what was called the Systems Operations Data Book, which was all the spec data. And what we were dependent upon in coming up with plans for the Get Home Fast maneuver, and in particular reentry day, was not specification day, it was best engineering judgment. So literally we had many people, not only at the contractors, but in Max Faget's organization, Cruise Systems, all these people gave us their best judgment on the capacity and abilities of the system. In fact, it was interesting, Tom Kelly Grumman called up and we had his phone number that if anybody wasn't responding to any of the questions we had, basically we would give a call. And John Aaron managed in incredible fashion. He's very well portrayed in the movie. Mm-hmm. And I sat through many sessions when he was arguing with the recovery guys or the command and service module guys. They had to have this power up at this time to make sure they were capable of reentry. And John always says that if we don't have enough power, we're not going to get this crew home. You got to make your judgment. I got to make my judgment. And basically, it was really a very interesting trade-off sessions internal to that data room. The most interesting one was to establish the passive thermal control. Basically, after we'd accomplished the Get Home Fast maneuver, and Deke Slayton wanted to put the crew to sleep. Kraft wanted us to power down. Max Faget said, nope, we got to establish thermal balance in the spacecraft, and that was the direction we went. So there were some interesting debates in there, all exercising their best judgment and what needed to be done.
Yeah, Gene, I want to ask you this. I had another question before you gave us that, and I appreciate that very much. On the Marta's involvement there, you showed us in the dry run yesterday, you had in these times of COVID, you had a surgical mask that, I don't know if you have it with you, but Fred Hayes, I know you have one. Don't you have a special mask you can show us to show how timely we are?
All right, yeah, let me get it in place.
Can you deploy that?
Yeah,
Francis is going to go get his.
There you go.
That's a
Mark,
good
do
look.
we need one?
I
Yeah.
wasn't giving it to you.
That's a good look. Gene has to bring his back to go with his vest.
Yeah, mine's somewhat competitive with Gene's. Gene's got a cool one too.
Yeah.
Apollo 13 vest, but I had to clean my office for this show, and it's somewhere in a box here.
Okay, let's go. Okay, Gene, let me ask you this. So compare what was happening back to Apollo 13. This is Splashdown Day 50 years ago. If you're joining us, this is on San Diego Air and Space Museum. Jim Kidrick, CEO and president. I'm Mark Larson, chairman of the board. Compare, Gene, what was happening to your days as an Air Force fighter pilot? Similarities, differences? I mean, you're known for very positive, forceful team building, failure is not an option, all of that. So compare test pilot versus what was happening 50 years ago on Apollo 13.
Well, I was very fortunate in the process of growing up, and I think this is true of most of us. Basically, we were the sons and daughters of the greatest generation. I would consider ourselves the Apollo generation. So basically, we were our teachers. Basically, when I was waiting for my flying assignment, I went to work for a McDonnell aircraft in data reduction, flight test data reduction. And my boss was, his first mission as a co-pilot on the B-17 was Blessy. So this is the kind of leadership we had. The boss, when we were out at Holloman Air Force Base in the B-52, was a Marine who fought in the South Pacific. So we had these people who grew us up. I grew up in a boarding house. My father died. My mother ran the boarding house for the military. And basically this entire period, we were in the learning, duty, honor, country, and sacrifice. So I think that we we're part of a generation. Jerry hit it very well. There was no give up, no surrender. Basically, we will continue to fight until we get the answer. We're going to accomplish this mission. I think that was described very well, and I think that was the nature of our generation of young people, not just controlling, but any place you would go in the United States, whether it be flying in the Air Force, Navy, Marines, whatever it was, we have a mission to accomplish. We have duty, and we intend to basically accomplish that mission.
Well done.
I'd like
Okay.
to say something. I'd like to say something about Kranz here, if I'm on the line. He talked about all this military kind of stuff, and there's a lot of camaraderie in the military. If you've seen the Band of Brothers and all of that, everybody has to support one another, even today. But Kranz established a real spirit of that in the Flight Control Division in various names. But anyway, it made that group much more cohesive and intense, and it led to all this activity that we're talking about later. We needed it in Apollo 13 and probably some other times too. So I like that. Personally, I like that spirit. I was in the military, as most of us were in that era, but I like that spirit of togetherness and doing things like that. And we had, there were picnics, there were beer busts, there was this and that and the other kind of things that got people together. And there was none of this cocooning stuff that's going on today. I don't like to get into that subject, but anyway, it's a different mentality, I think, among young people today than what we experienced coming up for us, old timers.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we go on to Glenn and Jim, we've established that Gene is not shy and withdrawn. Is that correct? And certainly for, like I said, for Glenn and Jim, because I know in the capsule, certainly Jim, you were working with Jack on this, but the filter, the better mousetrap and the construction of that, and certainly its importance, to getting back safely. Glenn and Jim, could you tell us a little bit about how that was devised and built inside the cockpit?
Yeah, and I guess first thing I would talk about was somewhere along the line, I had to deal with, do we have enough people on this project, and is it going to work, and so on and so on. And I have to say that I had been working with these guys from the crew systems group, and they could take a basket full of stuff and turn it into a car. They could, and they could do all kinds of things like that. And when this problem was up for grabs in terms of who's going to get it and who's going to do it, it was clear to me that the team that had been doing this sort of thing all along, they would make all kind of clamshell things that nobody ever thought of, and they could get it done in a certain period of time. And when they said, we're going to have this by tomorrow, tomorrow came and it was there. I mean, and I never blinked about worrying over that gadget. I didn't even know what it looked like, but the guys who were doing it were going to get it done, and God bless them, they did. They worked through it, and we had enough help from the astronaut corps. Joe Kerwin was the guy that I sent over there to follow it, and he did. And he was sort of like a super watcher, and he was covering how is this going to work okay for the crew, and it was marvelous to see it. I was very, very pleased. What was the other thing you want me to talk about?
No, I think you got it. I think Jim's view in the capsule.
Yes, this was actually a very good idea. I think this is a perfect example of how people can get together and almost a situation of trying to get rid of carbon dioxide, and then taking good leadership and initiative and leadership to change something which we didn't think possible. The instructions were, of course, done down there at Mission Control, and at the proper time, they read them all up to us. We did them one by one. I can remember one case where they said, take a piece of tape and then about the size of your arm and do that with the canister, and we started to do that, and slowly by procedure and procedure, we finally finished it, and then we sat back and we watched the gauge to see if actually we were reducing the amount of carbon dioxide in the lunar module. And we were very happy that happened, because it was something that I had never thought about before until that light came on and said that the carbon dioxide was rising inside the capsule.
You know, that's one of those great moments in a movie where as many times as we watch the movie, and I watched it twice this Apollo 13 week, it's always chilling at the same time. And you were there living it, you and Fred Hayes, and of course, Jack Swigert at the time. This is kind of a free-for-all now as we're kind of heading toward the close. We could go hours here, and we might, but this is kind of for everybody here. What about the aha moments, the goods, perhaps bads, as you think back on this? You guys have told these stories many times, but on the 50th anniversary, it's special. Maybe things have come to mind, the goods, maybe the bads as you step through recovery. Anything come to mind? Just raise your hand, and Ruben will miraculously have us appear here technologically.
Jerry.
Sure. Well, I got one that I have to admit, I learned a little more about it this week, listening to the real-time synced website that Ben Feist and Stan Slater have come up with. It's amazing. It's a lot of data. But I was on duty to get ready for the PC+2 burn. And for people that don't know what that means, we went around the moon, and then we did a maneuver. We called it pericynthian, which is the closest point to the moon that you hit, +2, because it was 2 hours after that point. We did a maneuver to push the whole stack faster and get it back to Earth quicker. It also allowed us to adjust the landing point at the free return. You didn't have much control there. So, but this put us pretty precisely exactly where we wanted to be. And it wasn't too important to a lot of people, but we talked earlier about transferring that reference system, that guidance system, over to the lunar module. And I was on duty, and we were using a lot of attitude controlled fuel. And we were having to do this and avoid what we call gimbal lock, which kind of drove the crew crazy, trying to kind of steer around it. There was a lot of motion, a lot of thing going on. But what we had to do to see is there was a thing called the alignment optical telescope. And Fred had to look in there when Jim got it all right. He had to look in there, and if he could see the sun, essentially, there were some other ideas, but if he could see any portion of the sun, it meant that the lunar module was okay, guidance-wise. And sure enough, after all that horsing around, and Fred looked in there, and here's what I learned about my friend Fred. We did that maneuver, and it wasn't real time critical. We were trying to do it at 74 hours exactly. And we did it about 10 minutes early. And he saw the sun, and we said, whew, boy, that's good. Well, when I listened to this replay, Fred, and I didn't catch this in real time because it was on board, you did it again at 74 hours on the mark, because you said to Jim, I just want to make sure it's in that right position. And when you looked at it the second time, you said it was actually in the center. It was it was centered better than before. So anyway, I thought I had been kind of quiet up to that point, and listening to this replay, I realized it was an important thing that sun be there, and I was quiet. I didn't talk much. As soon as Fred said it was okay, I started yakking like you can't believe. I was directing everybody in the control center to do this and do that, and I was happy as a clam. But it really was. That's a moment that I'll never forget. Jim and I have talked about it on occasion. I think Fred and I have talked about it. It was an important step.
Any other thoughts come to mind?
It was very important because we told the computer that to point the optics at the, as the sun. And so slowly but slowly, the spacecraft started to go around to get the optics up, and we could see the sun started to slowly come in, and finally it stopped right at the center, and we knew that the guidance system was very, very accurate.
Nice.
There was one other condition too that we did for coming back home again to, I guess, realign the spacecraft back on the free return course. There was a procedure to point the spacecrafts, get the spacecraft, the reticle on my window, and put it, superimpose it on the Earth's terminator. And that then placed the spacecraft so that you all could know exactly where it was with respect to the Earth. And therefore we can make a maneuver to get back on the free return course. That was a procedure, a backup that we had practiced for Apollo 8, never used it. And when you called it up on 13, I said, oh yeah, I think I remember that one.
Okay, any other aha moments? Next topic would be for anyone here to describe the blackout period during reentry, okay, and was it concerning?
Yeah.
Understatement. Kranz was on duty. He ought to talk about that one.
I don't even think you need talk about it. There is one photo that I think Pat Nesky, whoever was in mission control, once we recognized now we're a minute past, we should have heard from the crew.
Yeah.
Lenny, myself, Whittler, we're all staring at those damn, excuse my words, the clocks. You notice the expression in the face.
Yeah.
I think say it all. And that was probably, I think, the worst few seconds. But boy, when we got the contact, and when basically the carrier reported the radar contact and sonic boom, and boy, that was, I think, truly the finest hour. I mean, that was the point where you say, boy, we didn't have a chance, but we used everything we had. We basically operated as a team. It was a teams in mission control. It was the contractor teams. It was the leadership we had. We had the whole world behind us those days. And it was just a marvelous time to live. The Apollo generation has got an awful lot to be proud of the work that we did.
Well,
Yeah, you
we
mentioned,
agree.
Gene, that 1 minute delay, and that again in the movie is spellbinding for obvious reasons. But everybody thinks, okay, you get through all the harrowing experiences, now it's just reentry, and all the heat and wondering if the heat shield's right and whatever. Talk about every second feeling like a day long, and yet it worked.
You know what Lovell says, though, don't you? That they could actually hear us, but he thought it might make a good movie. So they didn't talk to us. And
Well, we want to thank Jim Lovell for giving Tom Hanks a career. This is a good point to do that.
I
Okay.
think, in all seriousness, I think that our angle coming in was a little bit off, which meant that the timing was going to be a little bit later until you get communication, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to start cleaning this up, just unless we want to go another hour or two.
It's about time to clean it up.
And what we'd like to do, and I'm just going to step this down. We'll start with Jim here in just a second, but kind of the importance of Apollo 13. Certainly the recent health crisis, Are there any lessons we would learn from Apollo 13 now and for the ages? You know, we've had a wonderful opportunity to recreate something that was so important to the entire world. So what was the importance of Apollo 3? Jim, we'll start with you. 13.
That's a very good question. You have to remember this was the fifth flight to the moon, the fifth flight going to the moon. People were getting kind of tired. You know, here we are, we're going to do it again. It was the third landing on the moon. And consequently, the populace of the United States and even the world wasn't behind us as much as it was before with 8 and 11 and even 12. And consequently, when the explosion occurred, this made everybody really understand the complexity of going to the moon and back again. It gave everybody a new thought about what we were doing at NASA, and it brought everybody's attention back to it again. So in my aspects then, I think that this was a tragedy in one respect, but a real triumph in another one, because it showed what people could do with good leadership and motivation and teamwork and thinking outside the box, how we can get an almost certain catastrophe back home safely.
Yeah. Amen.
Fred.
Well, I think if just take that on to today, certainly it's an example, and a few things I've spoken more to a general public of a situation we were in. Well, we were well trained, planned to do this this mission, and then all at once this happened, and now we had to do things different. And just as people around the world here and there are having to do things different to deal with the current crisis, change their lifestyle. And so we had to do things we had not planned to do, new procedures, and be adaptable as well as the whole team, and figuring that out and us to execute them that we had not specifically trained to do. And I think that's a lot what we're all dealing with today, and people behind the scenes, much like Mission Control, in this case, medical experts working to get a serum to solve the problem. But that's the only corollary I can think of for Apollo 13 directly to today's environment.
Milt.
Yeah. Well said.
Well, I was thinking of that, being there and experiencing that, and we did have a little view of the outside world that the crew probably didn't, but the whole world came together at this time, which is amazing. And I thought that was a unifying factor there that made Apollo 13 really worth it, really. Jim had talked about how this happened at exactly the right time. I personally think that there was a lot of divine help here. We had to, as Jim said, it happened at the right time. The people had stopped caring about following the mission so much, and they didn't even broadcast the first entry into the moon when they had the little TV, into the lunar module, when they first had the TV show. And I noticed you said that, Jim. Of course, they didn't cover it, and that's true. And I think all that it happened at just the right place, and all that just fit together. And I think it brought the country, or the world, not the country too, but the world together, and demonstrated what people could do.
Jerry.
Well, I think to sum up what everybody else has said, preparation and teamwork is, I think, was a lesson that we learned. We had both. We had plenty of time to prep, but then when things started going bad, if the team got tighter, and I think that is exactly what we've got to do in this crisis. We got to help each other and keep each other's 6 o'clock position protected. The other thing is, we went through, in the Apollo program, we went through 3 presidents, Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon.
Mm.
And there were 2 Democrats, 1 Republican. The Congress was split more than once between parties, and their support never wavered. We'd have change of administration, whatever. And Democrats and Republicans worked together to help us. And I think if there's a message that might fit really well today, is that we need that kind of political leadership to get past this crisis.
Well said.
Okay, Glenn.
Well, I liked all of the points that people raised here. The difficulty with it is how do we do that? Can we recreate the attitude and the response? What can we do to help make that happen in a way, Jim, with the tools of today, not the tools of yesterday? But it is. I'm impressed with what I heard all here today, and some of it I didn't know about. And I've always been impressed with it. We get the guys together, and they all loved it. They all loved it, and man, that's important too. People need to learn to like what they're doing, and I think there's a lot of that around that can be picked on. And anyway, God bless you guys. It was a wonderful experience.
Well, you can certainly feel the passion, and we're gonna close it out here with Gino.
Actually, I'd like to go back into, we talked about this incredible team coming together. And I think one of the real forcing functions were the lessons learned from the Apollo 1 fire and the loss of the crew. And assuming the individual and collective responsibilities for basically our failure to step up and say, it's not good enough. So we learned, I think, as a result of that, I think there was a different kind of realism that was addressed when we wrote the mission rules. The mission rules are one thing that I think are much in need of today. And this is where collectively, individually, and through the entire system, we make effective risk-based decisions and judgments. And then we test them through the process of training. We document them, we review them with what I say are real elders, the people who have been in that path before, until finally we're ready to execute. And I think this is the real key that I think we need to address today. What are the mission rules for how we proceed? How are we going to validate those rules? How does this team come together? Who is going to be in the leadership roles before we make any more decisions? I think we need national level of leadership. They have to be very well identified and very capable and very competent. And then we ought to turn them loose, make the decisions, and move forward.
Hey, Jim, thank you, Gene. Before you wrap up, Jim Kidrick, our President and CEO, Mark Larson here, Chairman of the Board, on behalf of the men and women on our Board of Directors in these very trying times, and for every man and woman on the staff at San Diego Air and Space Museum, because physically the museum is closed for obvious reasons during all this COVID crisis. But this is what we do. And we're not tooting our horn here a lot, other than the fact that we believe in legacy. We believe in lessons of legacy. You've seen the screen pop up like you see now to donate. Text Apollo to 44321. And there's some incentives there. I don't want to sound like some PBS pledge break here, but it's important because I'll just say this, a little back channel info. When all this crisis started hitting, and we, members of the board, said, what do? Do we just close? Do we just stop the legacy? Do we turn it off until, because we're all faced with this in the country. Jim and Sandy, our CFO, and the team got together, and the board, and came up with a brilliant plan, thinking ahead of this. Our attitude is we'll open maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day, because we're not stopping. The legacy lives on as it embodied in the men and women all the people behind Apollo 13. So miraculously, we've managed to stay afloat in this. We welcome your donations. We don't get any federal funding or any of that kind of stuff. There's plenty of funding going out right now, so we appreciate your support. But that's not why we did this today. The reason we did this today is because of exactly what all these men, sorry, all these heroes, and I'll try to get through this, have meant to our nation. What they mean, they'd be the last people to call themselves heroes, but we can call them that because they are. And this is as current, and maybe more current today than it was 50 years ago, as to why it matters. And that's why we're here and why we continue to press forward. And gentlemen, just personally, we've all become great friends over the years. And that is, for a kid from the Midwest who watched all of this early on, to know you as friends and brothers is marvelous. And I wish there was a way to encapsulate that and transfer that to our viewers. I think they get a sense of that today. And Jim Kidrick, thanks again for putting this whole thing together today. Appreciate you all. Love you.
Well, I'm going to tell you, it's the most worthwhile thing that we've done in an awfully long time. And to each one of you, thank you. Thank you for responding to my emails, responding to my phone calls. And we want to thank Ruben, okay, who's been our techie guy, okay,
Nice
through
job.
this process. We were able to do a complete test of this yesterday, which was wonderful. We got everybody on board, but I just can't thank you enough. This was certainly, your team was, the right team at the right time. And I will tell you, it's still the right time. It's the right time today. So thank you very much. And I'm going to tell you, I salute each one of you.